Inklings was a group of scholars and writers associated with Oxford University during the 1930s to the 1950s. It wasn't a formal club with rules and officers, but an informal discussion group, a gathering of friends and colleagues who had similar interests and ideas. At the heart of the Inklings were J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, but up to 17 other people have been associated with the group, including authors and editors Owen Barfield, Hugo Dyson, Neville Coghill, Lewis's brother Warnie, and eventually Tolkien's youngest son, Christopher. The group developed from two earlier groups. One of these, the Coal-Biters, was started by Tolkien and involved the reading of Icelandic sagas and poetry. The name came from the habit of the ancient Icelanders of sitting, supposedly, so close to the fire that they were almost biting the coal. This group soon ran out of literature to read and discuss, though. In the meantime, a student named Edward Lean had begun a literary club, which he called the Inklings. Then after Lean graduated, C.S. Lewis borrowed the name for the circle of friends who had been gathering in his rooms at Magdalen College to talk about their writing. The name itself actually has a double meaning. On the one hand, it refers to the newly formed or vague ideas that people might have, that is, inklings of ideas, and on the other hand, it refers to the fact that the members of the group dabbled in ink. Early on, the Inklings met on Thursday nights in the rooms of Lewis. Sometimes they also met at the Eagle and Child, also known as the Bird and the Baby, on St. Giles Street in Oxford, usually on Tuesdays, to drink and talk and smoke, and most importantly, to read out loud and talk about their writing in progress. Some very important works came about as a result of these meetings. Probably the best known are The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, with a close runner-up, the first book in Lewis's science fiction trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet. These books came about as a result of Lewis and Tolkien's discovery that they couldn't find enough to read of the sort of books that they liked, so they decided to write some themselves. Interestingly, one of the books to be read and discussed by the Inklings was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which Tolkien wasn't much of a fan of because he thought that the Narnia series was too obviously allegorical. Generally, though, the Inklings supported each other and encouraged each other with their writing. Other works, besides the best-known fantasies that were nourished by the talk and encouragement of the Inklings, were some of the literary criticism that both Tolkien and Lewis produced. Tolkien wrote and gave a talk which became a defense of fantasy and fairy tales against charges of escapism and childishness, a talk which became an important work in the field of fantasy criticism. It was entitled On Fairy Stories. Lewis eventually wrote a collection of essays entitled Of This and Other Worlds, again a defense of fantasy, and in this case also science fiction. Largely through the work of these two men, fantasy gained credibility and validity as a literary genre. The Inklings were all interested to a greater or lesser extent in fantasy. All of them were interested in the writing and analysis of narrative fiction, and many of them were interested in Christian themes, most notably C.S. Lewis, who became famous for his many works defending Christianity, such as the Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity. Lewis began as an agnostic, then became a theist who believed in God but not a personal Christ, and finally, after a long talk one night with fellow Inklings Hugo Dyson and Tolkien, he became a strongly committed Christian. We can't say that without the Inklings we wouldn't have had the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings. We can say that the Inklings had an important influence on the production of those works and many others, and left a lasting legacy. Oxford University has had many literary groups, but none as important as the Inklings.